Hello and welcome back to Wondrous Minds. Well, today on Wondrous Sessions, I have a question for you. Now, very recently, we have seen that India has overtaken Japan to become the world's fourth largest economy. But what does that exactly mean, and how does that impact people's life? Well, and critics have said that, India might have surpassed Japan in terms of GDP, but that does not translate to people's everyday life. Like the GDP per capita income of India is far less impressive as India's. So, what does GDP actually mean, and why is it important, even though this has clearly got so many, so much wrong, and that it does not reflect real world, situation at ground level. So, why exactly is GDP important? First of all, what GDP actually is that it is the total monetary value of all the goods and services made in a country in a particular area, in a particular year. Now, what India's GDP surpassing Japan's means is that it has got more, it is producing more goods and services than Japan in the current year, in the year that was calculated in. Now, what does that mean? That firstly, GDP means that you have a higher role to play in global organizations like the G20, the IMF, and the World Bank. Also, it means higher GDP means that your economy is growing. So that means that larger investments will be coming, and FDI would be more because a higher GDP means that your country is growing at a faster rate than the country referred to as. And also, it means that there will be higher government revenue, and GDP means that the country can afford to invest more, also can also make more expenditure, because if you can make higher GDP, it means you can have better income. The national income is higher, and that means that you can have a higher expenditure as well. And then again, national pride. We are taking pride in the fact that we have surpassed Japan, and that is indeed a thing to take pride on. Now, why does GDP have a limit? Firstly, distribution. Well, if you can have a person who is a large industrialist, then that person's contribution to GDP is obviously higher. That industries and that industrialists estate will have a higher contribution to the GDP than any person, a common man. So that creates a disparity, that it is of a state that India's top 10% is contributing a lot larger than the bottom 50% of the contribution. Like they are contributing almost 80% to India's GDP, and in comparison to the 50% of India's population. And again, it does not take into account things like happiness and education and all other things. And also, population and inflation also plays a role in GDP. A higher population means that you will obviously have to make things larger, the goods and services for to sustain that large population will be larger, and that means a higher GDP. And again, inflation, the same goes for it, that even if GDP does not calculate into inflation, so if the prices of things are higher, it will automatically also lead to higher GDP. Now, coming to GDP per capita, that people are arguing that Japan has a far higher GDP per capita than India, and in fact, Japan's GDP per capita is 33,000 US dollars, while India's is around 2,800. So that large gap means that people of India are earning less. Now that helps in comparing the living standards across countries, and is a better metric to use than GDP in terms of how actually people are living. But that is a bit misleading. Again, firstly, because we don't calculate GDP per capita as the income of individuals, as in we take the average. So if there is, let's say, if the GDP per capita is suppose 1,000 rupees, then it can be that if there is a population, like let's say if the GDP per capita is 1,000, and there are two people living in that country. If a person has a GDP of um, let's say around 2000, and another person has a income of 500, then it is the average of these two people, and that would definitely be somewhere in between, so like, let's say if someone is earning 100 rupees and someone is earning 200, the average is 150. And also the same can be that if someone is earning 150 and another is also earning 150, the average is still 150. So if there is a person who is earning a lot more and there is a person who is earning a lot less, the same GDP per capita would be if the two person were earning around the same. So that again, the same income disparity works in this. And in fact, so that like Maharashtra is India's top economy, and only seven districts of Maharashtra accounts for more than 54% of Maharashtra GDP. So again, GDP per capita is not really the metric that we should be looking at. And also another factor that plays into account when comparing countries on the basis of the per capita income is that India's like cost of living is much lower than many Western countries, and that includes Japan. In India, you can have a meal at anything even $2, while the same meal would cost you $15 in Tokyo or any other place. So for that, the adjustment that is made is purchasing power parity. So we were calculating the GDP per the purchasing power parity, that is PPP. Then we can have the GDP calculated at the differences in the cost of living, and in that comparison, GDP of India per this metric is the third largest as a country. But again, India does fall back a lot when it comes to GDP PPP per capita, and India is at 100 and something, around 130 in that rank. So that again is not as useful, because well, the comparison again is on a very similar note, and while we can calculate the income level better, the comparison does not stand very well. Now the other index, now coming, not going by just the money factor, there is human development index, and in that we calculate the life expectancy, income, education, and all of these factors, and then factor in that how what is the human development, and like how that is rising, the human like development aspects, angles, such as the life expectancy, income, education. These are more taken into account, and again, in that, the economic growth is not taken into account. So if we are calculating or we are searching for an alternative to GDP, then HDI is definitely not one. Now there are other aspects and other metrics that are taken. For example, there is the genuine progression index, in which it adjusts for income and inequality, and also adjusts values for unpaid work and the cost of crime and pollution. There is green GDP, also another aspect, another metric that is taken more towards the sustainable development, and how much a country is spending on sustainable development is taken into account and is given higher priority than the traditional economic way of doing things. And there are other methods followed by different countries, like in terms of how poverty, India has a very different metric and different measurement of calculating poverty than the West standard. In that similar way, Bhutan has introduced the Gross National Happiness Index, prioritizing the well-being and culture and economical diversity of the country. And also, New Zealand has something called the National Happiness, National Happiness Wealth Index, which is another thing that is used by that country to focus more on wellness people. So these angles, these aspects that are taken by countries to take into account what their priority is, this is something that can be done. But then again, this would not help in comparison, We cannot compare between countries if they are using these metrics. So that is a problem with that. So um, the thing is that, can we have something which measures all of these things accurately? Like, there is no point in criticizing GDP, because for what it is a useful measure. It measures what it needs to measure, and that is a very different metric than comparing, you know, like, you cannot get the data of how India's population lives from a GDP. GDP has a very completely different usage, and admitted that if people are being happy for India's growth in GDP, at the same time they should be also aware of the situation on the ground, that is, on in terms of the per capita income, in terms of happiness index, in terms of human development index. But that doesn't mean that GDP's role is diminished. But the thing is, can we have something, an index which measures everything as it should, measures, gives a complete answer? Well, in my opinion, no, because these aspects, economic aspect, environmental aspect, sociological aspect, the socio political angle, the socio-economic angle, these are all things which are very, very distinctly, even though they are very interconnected, but they are so distinctly different that we have to at least have something for the national, uh, you know, situation, and something at the ground level. And again, I very much admitted that the fact that GDP per capita income is also very flawed, because, well, as I mentioned, in Maharashtra, 7 districts only are contributing to 54% of the GDP per capita and in general. So if we just take out Mumbai and Pune out of Maharashtra, then the per capita income would go down a lot. And again, in the city of Mumbai itself, there are billionaires and there are also people who are earning very less. There are people living in the slums. So the GDP per capita is calculating for all of them. It is averaging out for all of them. So even that is not a perfect measure. So can we have a perfect measure is the question that I would like to end this session, a brief session on. Um, so what do you guys think? Can we have an ideal metric for measuring each and every country's progress, each and every country's growth in terms of not only economy but also how they are developing its people? Or should we not go by GDP, not go by these angles, but rather have a country specific angle to these, and not overhype the growth that we are seeing, overhype the fact that we have become the fourth largest economy, and rather focus on something that would focus on our development, our people's development, and work on it, because we definitely lack a lot. um, so yeah, that's it from this session, and I would love to hear your views in the comments, so kindly do the honors. And with that, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.